Welcome to the Recovery and Company podcast, featuring addiction and recovery experts with the latest recovery news, treatment options, therapeutic techniques, causes of addiction, and stories of hope and healing from those in recovery. Hey friends, welcome to the show. My name's Jody Stevens, and I am joined by Dr. Andrew Proulx. Dr. Andrew is a medical doctor. He's an addiction survivor. He's a best-selling author, and his books include The Alcoholic Within, Our Brain, Genetics, Psychology, and the 12 Steps as Psychotherapy. I love how that's all integrated in that title there. Also, A Trip Through the 12 Steps with a doctor and a therapist, and then Understanding and Helping an Addict and Keeping Your Sanity, which is very important. So, Dr. Andrew Proulx, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thanks for the invite, Jody. I appreciate it.
Recovery and Company is a production of the Life Change Center. We've got 3 locations. We're in Northern Nevada, providing treatment for heroin and prescription medication abuse. We would love it if you would help us spread the message. You can do that by listening, of course, sharing this program on social media or with anybody you know who could benefit. You can leave a review on iTunes or whatever app you're listening through. So we're on most of them, iTunes, Spotify, TuneIn, Amazon, Audible, or by clicking media on our website at thelifechangecenter.org. Dr. Andrew, where are you located?
I'm in the Great White North. I live in Ontario, Canada.
Oh my gosh,
Yes.
Wow.
I'm French Canadian, that's why I talk funny.
So I grew up in Alaska, and when I drove down the Alcan, I drove through BC, which is probably nowhere near you.
Right, yeah, I'm kind of north of Michigan.
And what's like the coolest thing to do there? It's supposed to be beautiful, right?
Yeah, I live in the Niagara area, which is kind of the wine country.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, there's it's a lot of stuff to do outdoors. Problem is everything shuts down in the wintertime. We just had a horrible winter, and as did much of the United States. And but it's a time of year now to get outside and do things. So that's the kind of thing that makes me grateful for my recovery, that I'm able to get out and enjoy things like that again. So.
Well, you know what they say about the snow? If you just got to get out, you got to get out and enjoy it. So
Yeah.
I'm a big skier. You got to ski and then
Oh my.
just get some snowshoes, Doc.
Yeah.
Just head out on your snowshoes. So are you, you were an ER doctor. Are you also a psychotherapist or a therapist as well?
Yeah. So I practiced medicine for 15 years, and I worked in the ER. I also had an office practice, and I worked as a hospitalist during that time as well. But alongside my medical practice, I had a psychotherapy practice, which I really enjoyed. I did extra training during my residency in order to be qualified to do psychotherapy. Yeah, as it happens, I'm doing my PhD in psychology now, in addiction psychology. So it all kind of fits together nicely. It's good stuff. It didn't help me figure myself out when I was using and drinking, though, that's for sure.
I think you could have 5 PhDs and we still wouldn't have all the answers, And
Yeah.
that's just how complicated humans are, I tell you what. So tell me your story. I want to hear about how you fell into your addiction and recovery, and then kind of like the pivotal moment, really, that impacted what made you change, where you just kind of said, a lot of us have that pivotal moment where we're like, okay, this is it. I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this. So maybe kind of the where were you then? How did it happen? And kind of what was that pivotal moment?
Right, the so-called spiritual awakening, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and sometimes we have 5 or 6 of them, right?
Yeah. My story is similar to a lot of people's story. We all have much in common, but I was a person, I was able to go through life. I drank, here and there to excess, for sure. And I even experimented with drugs here and there, but it never was an issue for me. I never, thought twice about it afterwards, and lived my life. And then I reached a point in life where I was going through a divorce, and it was very, very difficult. I got, into that whole mindset that poor me, I'm a victim. It's my situation is so horrible, and feeling sorry for myself and all that. And I got filled with a lot of anger. I was angry at the system for, the court system for how I felt I was being treated. I was angry at my ex-wife. I was angry at the whole world. I was angry at God, for God's sake. It was horrible anger. And In fact, I would even call it rage, and it got to the point where I couldn't sleep at night, and I couldn't, focus on what I was doing because I was so filled with self-pity and anger and all that. So, of course, I had a legitimate reason. I had a wisdom tooth problem, and I ended up getting a prescription for prescription opioids, and I found it numbed things for me a little bit, and away I went. And that became my new way to cope with what I thought was my injustice and my horrible emotions and feelings. And, I went downhill real fast, real fast. Next thing you know, I was drinking, and it was all day, every day. And, of course, in the medical profession, I had very, very easy access to opioid narcotics. There's unfortunately a lot of holes in the system where doctors can do that. And next thing you know, I had my license suspended, and I was homeless, and, it was horrible. I went downhill really fast. And I'd given up. I thought I had tried everything. I'd gone to counseling. I went to a 12-step meeting. I was dragged there by my brother-in-law. I tried to quit a million times. Each time I was convinced that this time I was going to do it. This time I'd had enough.
Right.
I'd make it a few days, or I'd be drinking instead of using, or I'd stop drinking and I'd be using instead of drinking.
Yeah,
And
they call that switching, that we ad infinitum, maybe I'll switch to this or just do
yeah,
this or just, I had my all tequila diet where it was just going to be a pint, which ended up being two. And I know
right,
what you
right.
mean, or I'll switch to wine because, I'll look prettier drinking and yeah.
It makes sense at the time, right?
Yeah, somehow it does.
Yeah, so I got to the point where I accepted that I was too addicted. My life was too messed up, and I was too messed up in the head. I'd practiced psychotherapy and medicine for years, and I couldn't understand, why I couldn't stop. My mother used to ask me, she said, "You're so miserable, and you're ruining your life, and you're losing your children, you're losing everything. Why can't you just stop?" And
Right.
the thing is, I had no answer for her. I
Yeah.
couldn't understand why I couldn't stop. Even as a psychotherapist and a doctor, I could not understand what was going on with me. So I just accepted that I was just too far gone. There was no way out. So I was so miserable. I couldn't keep living like that. I was in that situation where I couldn't live without the drugs, and I couldn't live with them. So I was planning my own suicide. And
Oh.
the only thing that was holding me back was I'd seen the after effects of suicide as an ER doc. A lot of times when they bring in, a body of somebody and that had killed themselves and their kids, and would be there in the ER and crying, and I thought about my kids, and but I was basically just thinking of ways I could reconcile it with them, and had it all planned out. And then one day, out of the blue, a couple of my friends who are in recovery, I don't know what made them do it, but they showed up, and I was passed out on the floor, and they picked me up off the floor, and they said, "That's it, we're taking you to the hospital." And I said, "You know what? Don't take me to the hospital. They're not going to be able to do anything for me there." I said, "Take me to the detox center. I'll go there." And I didn't have any high expectations. I didn't think I would be able to, they had anything magic there that would make me better. So I just thought I'll go there and I'll, dry out a bit. I'll hide out from the world where nobody can find me. And, once I'm feeling physically better, then, I'll be able to figure this all out. I went there, and there were guys that came in and put on 12-step meetings twice a day. And I had nothing to do there. So I went to those meetings, and here were all these people that had been addicted to, we're talking meth addicts, crack addicts, alcoholics, and then, of course, as most of us are, polysubstance users of all types. People that had been badly abused, and, and here they were living normal lives, and they were happy and functional. And a lot of them were even worse than me. Some of them were literally living under a bridge, and here they are, 5 years sober. And so they caught my attention, and they kept talking about the big book, and I didn't know what that was. So I asked one of them afterwards, and he said, "Oh yeah, it's the AA book, Alcoholics Anonymous." And so he gave me one, and I had nothing to read there, and I like reading, so I got reading it, and honestly, I wasn't even 30 pages into it when a light went off in my head. I realized, oh my God, I'm nothing special here. My problem is nothing unusual. I'm not different from anyone else. I'm just the same as the millions of other addicts and alcoholics who came before me. They were just as addicted, just as messed up. Their lives were just as much a train wreck as mine, some of them more. And look at all these guys, all these people. They beat it, So a little light went off in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time that I realized that I can do this. Like there's millions of people that have done this, and I can do it too. And there is a way. What a difference. I went from being basically a dead man walking, someone who had accepted his own death, to someone who all of a sudden had hope. Yes, there is a way out. Not only that, but as messed up as my life is now, look at those guys at the meetings. All I have to do is get sober and I can start putting things back together again, and the big book has pretty early on the 12 promises about things that'll happen in your life if you just take care of your recovery. And in psychology, they call that moment self-efficacy, where
Yes.
Self-efficacy is your belief that you can accomplish something. So if you don't believe you can accomplish it, you're not going to try, right? Why put in the effort if you don't think it's possible?
Mm-hmm.
But when you believe it's possible, in fact, when you know it's possible, all of a sudden now your whole mindset changes. And now you're ready and willing to do it. And I was definitely, before I'd been to a 12-step meeting before, but I was dragged there by my brother-in-law. I didn't want to be there. I looked at my watch the whole time. I judged everybody else. And I was sitting there, oh God, get me out of here. But now I was going to these meetings with an open mind. I was listening to what they said. I was no longer, worried about, who's going to see me at an AA meeting. And, don't they know who I am? And, all this stuff. I let go of all that. I just let go of that, that addict's need for control, that addict's need to, to have his ego massaged, and I just let go, and I just said, you know what, and so I did everything they told me at the 12-step meetings. Did everything. I got a sponsor, got a home group, started reading the book every day. I got in touch with another person in recovery every day. Did my meditation. I worked through the steps. In fact, I worked through the steps with urgency. I wanted what those people had. I wanted to get better. And so I went through the steps with diligence and very early on. And what a difference, man. That's how I ended up in recovery.
What
And
an
that was
amazing...
6 years ago. So
How long was that?
I got sober in September 2016.
That is so awesome. Wow.
Yeah,
Thank you so
for a
much
person that was as defeated as I was, that's a miracle. All recovery is a miracle. There
I
isn't
feel like there's a lot of things we have to learn, though, in that. The being homeless, the anger, the rage, the self-pity, all of those things, when you were working through that, probably being down and out in the way that you were, and then working through the recovery, were you able to come to terms with a lot of those things, a lot of those emotional issues?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was 100% because of the 12-step program. I've been practicing cognitive behavioral therapy clinically for years, right, as a psychotherapist. I have never in my life seen such a clean, simple, to the point, accessible access to really, really good cognitive behavioral therapy as I have through the 12 steps. You could spend $25,000 on psychotherapy and never get from it what you would by going through the steps with a good sponsor. And it took all that stuff, the self-pity, the self-loathing, the guilt, the remorse, just the negative feelings, the anger, resentment, all of that was lifted off my shoulders. It's something I'm grateful for, because honestly, I was better off mentally after doing the 12 steps than I was even before I was ever addicted. So it was a miraculous process for me.
And the other thing people need to understand is you have these friends that come to your aid, and then you've got these people around you that have something that you want. So I always tell people, whatever, AA's great, NA's great, getting therapy's great. I know a guy that just got a lot of mentors all around him because he didn't particularly care for the 12 steps. So he got these mentors and people that would help him. I think the point is that you can't do this alone.
And that's the thing, like a lot of people believe, and I believed at the time, that recovery was simply the absence of using drugs or alcohol, right? And it's not. If you don't clean up the mess,
right,
that's above your shoulders, between your ears. If you don't clean up that mess, you're going to end up back where you were sooner or later, So it's not simply about just not using drugs or alcohol. Whatever works for you. Some people, the 12 steps doesn't work. They prefer, they find a therapy or a program or something else that works. You have to do something to clean up the mess, and you have to surround yourself with that support.
Are you working as a therapist today as well, right now, as well as a doctor?
No. When I was in recovery, I still didn't understand what had happened to me. I didn't understand why I had completely lost control of myself and why I couldn't stop when I was so miserable and all that. So I just threw myself into it academically. I need to figure out what happened. So I started learning about addiction, and I really got into it. And next thing you know, it became really consuming for me. And that's been my pursuit ever since. So I went back to school to do my PhD in addiction psychology, and I wrote a few books about the subject. I've become a researcher in that field as well. But I do still do some consulting work, and I do some public educational work where I speak, especially to other healthcare professionals that were like me, that I didn't understand addiction when I was in practice. And even as an ER doctor, I saw addicts as bad people who wake up every day and make bad decisions. And there's no way you're going to help anybody if you have that attitude. And so I'm involved with that sort of thing, but I haven't been working as a therapist for a couple of years now.
Are you working towards changing that stigma in the medical industry? I mean, how do we change that? I feel like it's starting to change today.
Yeah.
I have a paramedic that's coming on, and he went through the same thing where he just thought these people were all, losers, had made bad decisions. And in fact, I wrote a blog about that on our website about, my brother died of his addiction, but prior to that, he'd had this seizure and I didn't know what was going on. I called the paramedics and they were actually kind of mean when they came to pick him up. And I thought he was dying. I didn't know what a seizure was. I was like 25. We just didn't know what to do. Nobody knew what to do.
Yeah.
Is that changing at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, just for example, a while back, I was invited to speak at a local hospital to the doctors and nurses there about addiction and how to approach people that they see in the emergency room with addiction, and also, about addiction within, the medical profession. And they actually, a few days before my talk to them, it was canceled because a few of the doctors complained, "Hey, we don't want him here. He's an addict. He used to write his own prescriptions and use drugs." So, I'd already been in recovery for years, and I was doing good things, and I was, and even then they still, the stigma still, I was worthless to them. They didn't even want to hear what I had to say because I was that worthless to them as an addict. Right. So you can imagine how they would feel if somebody came in and who had a seizure because of substance use. They wouldn't be empathetic or caring or have any insight whatsoever into the person they're dealing with. But I think the medical schools are getting better at addressing that.
Did you have to take addiction training in your medical school?
Yeah, I went to medical school in the 90s. So medical school itself was 4 years. And during that time, we had 1 2-hour lecture about alcoholism and addiction. I came out of medical school and residency with the attitude that, there's people out there that are preying on doctors by trying to get prescriptions out of them for narcotics. And, it's us versus them. And, with the attitude, basically, these are bad people that just wake up every day and do bad things until you're one of them.
Well, but then we look at how many people are dying of overdoses in this country. What was it? It was several 100,000 each year. Maybe it's way more than that. And then with the opioids, we can see that if someone wanted to just quit, they would have. This many people wouldn't be dying if there wasn't something more to it. And I think that's with the opioid crisis. I think that's people are starting to wake up, especially in the medical industry, going, something more's going on here.
Yeah, well, especially where, my addiction started with a legitimate prescription. And, You know that 92% of these are statistics from the CDC. 92% of people who are addicted to heroin started out on prescription opioids that were prescribed to them. So it's doctors need to own up at some point. The whole medical field needs to own up at some point.
Right. Which prescriptions did you start with that got you addicted initially?
Oxycocet.
So you went through the recovery process. You have written all these books. You wanted to find out what happened to you. What did you uncover?
You know, as a physician, my interest was, in the, physically what's happening here. So, and my research now is in the neuropsychology of addiction. So it's the link between brain and behavior. There really is such a thing as the addicted brain. I mean, it's not a myth. It's not an excuse. There is such a thing as the addicted brain. And
Yes.
over the past 10 years or so, we've developed new brain imaging technology that allows us to see what's happening in the brain in real time, in people, in real live people in real time, which we could never do before. Before, we could only check people at autopsy to see what was going on in their brain. Now we can see in living people what's going on. And we've seen that there's fundamental changes that occur in the brain of genetically susceptible people when they expose their brain repeatedly to addictive substances. People have heard the term neuroplasticity. I've heard everyday people using it all the time, so I think a lot of people know what that means. But plasticity is basically our body, our body tissue's abilities to adapt to our needs.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, our muscles have plasticity, right? If we lay around and don't use our muscles, they get smaller and they lose tone and they become weak and diminished, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what's the point in maintaining big muscles if you never use them, right? But
It's kind of like when people go up into space, or whatever, and they come
exactly,
back and they like fall out of the spaceship and they can't walk,
yeah,
or
because
something.
that's plasticity, right? So, but if we exercise and stay active, our muscles respond by growing in size and strength, right? So the brain is the most plastic tissue in the body. I mean, it's made to adapt, right? So our brain is made to adapt so that we can learn. When we start a new job, when we need a new skill, when something around us changes, we're able to adapt, right? So that's why our brain is so plastic. So, and likewise, if you're laying around watching TV, not using your brain, it's not gonna, not gonna get any stronger. But if you use your brain, challenge it, it'll grow in capacity and ability. The brain changes in addiction are neuroplasticity, but they're negative changes. They're bad changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the DNA in our brain is actually changed. It's
Wow.
called epigenetics. So people have heard about addiction genes and all that, but addiction genes, most of them lie dormant until they're exposed to addictive substances, and then they become active, and they create changes within the brain. So even the brain cells look different under a microscope in the addicted brain, and they communicate differently between each other, the brain cells. And they begin to form new connections and new pathways. So they work differently, right down to the molecular structure and DNA of our brain cells, how they function, how they communicate, and the different pathways they make become changed when people cross that line into addiction.
Is there a magic line, or is
Yeah,
it just
I
different
believe
there's that kind of point of no return that people talk about, but it seems so mystical. Like, what is that
Yeah, no,
line?
I believe there is an actual, fairly discrete line that you pass, and that's what we can see clinically. When we talk to someone, and I've talked to people that say, well, people that were started, to use cocaine or something, or starting to drink, and they noticed it became a problem, and they started to lose things, and finally they said, oh, that's enough, I'm out of here, and they left it behind and never looked back. I think they dodged a bullet there, but they did not develop an addicted brain. I say to people like that, you know what, I'm happy for you. I couldn't do that. I tried a million times. I was probably even more desperate than you. I tried it, a million times. They haven't crossed the line. So if their brain were examined, it probably would not show very many, if any, of the changes. So it may be for different reasons. They might have had a different life situation. They might have not have had the same genes as I do. There is a point, I believe there is a discrete point where I'm talking, the people that really need an intervention to stop, such as attending a treatment center, that sort of thing. Because there's lots of problem substance use, but not all of them develop full-out addiction.
And some people feel a certain way. A friend of mine told me that, that her doctor had said, if you take this and you're like, oh, it just makes me tired. I just don't like it. I can't wait till I don't have to take this anymore. That's a normal reaction. But if you're someone like you or I, where you drink or take a pill and you're like, this is great. This is the best thing in the world. I think I'll clean out the garage and clean the kitchen. And, I feel better than I ever have. I've arrived. This is how it's meant to be. That we're that sort of 1% or 2% that have that addicted brain where that's actually not a normal reaction.
Yeah. Well, when it really becomes abnormal is when it's no longer fun and you're still obsessively doing it, right? Mm-hmm. So when you get to the point where you might not even feel a high. In fact, you're only doing it to stave off withdrawal,
To feel normal.
Because you're in your addicted brain, in your addicted mind, you have too much fear to live without it, or you're too obsessed. You can't stop thinking about it. That's the difference. And I think a lot of the contempt that people have for addicts is because, they'll say, well, I used to use cocaine or I tried meth. And as soon as I realized that, I was getting in trouble from it or it was causing me problems, I just walked away from it. So, that's his problem, but I'm sorry. Yeah, I know you had problem substance use, but you weren't addicted. And I'm sure if we looked at, if we examined them clinically, we'd see that they did not have an addicted brain. In fact, I'm sure of it.
I totally agree, Dr. Andrew, because I know my experience and the experience of so many people struggling with addiction was that they were not able to walk away from it until they were able to get the help that they needed. Thank you, Dr. Andrew, for joining us for part one. We're going to continue in the next episode and talk with Dr. Andrew. We are going to talk about, we're going to continue discussing the addiction in the brain, but also the addicted brain and how much of it is nature versus nurture argument and how trauma plays into the mix. We'll also talk about cognitive biases, overcoming efforts of our addicted brain to reassert itself. And Dr. Andrew is also going to share how he incorporates addiction science into the 12 steps. We will talk about humility, the importance of letting go of self-pity, the importance of self-efficacy, and also the problem of control and the need for control and how to let go of that. So, Dr. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us for part one.
Thank you, Jody.
In the meantime, friends, check out Dr. Andrew Proulx. It's Proulx is how you say his last name. He's got a couple great books. They are on Amazon, Understanding and Helping the Addict and Keeping Your Sanity. I'm actually reading that one now. Thanks for sending them to me, Dr. Andrew. Great book. They are packed, fully loaded books, tons of information. Also, The Alcoholic Addict Within, Our Brains, Genetics, Psychology, and the 12 Steps as Psychotherapy. And then also a trip through the 12 steps with a doctor and a therapist. You can find those all on Amazon. And thank you so much for listening to Recovery and Company. This podcast is a production of the Life Change Center. We are a heroin and pill addiction opioid treatment center. We have 3 locations in Northern Nevada. We provide medication-assisted treatment. We provide counseling, both individual and family, and we have a lot of great family programs too. Please reach out. You can find us at thelifechangecenter.org. You can check out our podcast and blog by clicking on podcast and blog. And we'd love it if you would help us continue to help others recover from addiction by clicking the donate button. We always need your support. And of course, check out this podcast. And also we have a blog. You just need to click podcast or blog at thelifechangecenter.org. And this show, by the way, Recovery and Company, is available on most listening apps to Amazon, Spotify, or whatever your favorite listening app is. So thank you so much for being here, friends, and we will talk to you next time.